Noah, Ajax said, leading the remaining 6 Eternals. The group stopped in front of Noah and the 2 men with him. Ajax first nodded toward Kingo, then to Noah. Kingo nodded back before falling in with the rest of the Eternals. Noah, Noah replied to her greeting, then introduced the 2 beside him. This is Tony Stark, Iron Man. I don't think I need to introduce him. I'm sure you've all heard of him. Cough, cough. Hi, everyone. Friends of the Eternals. Tony felt Noah's introduction was a little presumptuous. What if someone said they'd never heard of him? That would have been awkward. He opened his helmet, revealing his face, and gave the Eternals a fuller, more showy greeting. Most of the Eternals already knew of Iron Man. Even Makari, the speedster who had lived in seclusion in the Domo for centuries, had caught wind of Tony while monitoring outside information on the Domo's equipment. If anyone had been completely cut off from the outside world, it was Druig, the village's recluse. He had stayed to himself for years and had only the fragmentary news his companions shared during their conversations. After Ajax's arrival, Druig had heard enough to know a little about Tony, this extraordinarily strange human. After introducing Tony, Noah turned and raised a hand toward Banner. This is Bruce Banner. You might not recognize the name, but he's one of Earth's top minds and among its strongest. Hello everyone. Banner forced an awkward smile. The Eternals stared at him with a mixture of curiosity and polite appraisal that made him uneasy. Is this one strong? He just looks like a regular human. Sprite, perpetually young and standing behind Ajax, scanned Banner a few times and murmured, Sprite, don't say that. Cersei, standing nearby, put a hand on Sprite's shoulder to quiet her. She knew better than to let thoughtless words fall where they might be overheard, and Noah could hear whispers like that. He did hear them now, but made no comment. It was merely small talk. Hello, Mr. Stark. Hello, Mr. Banner. Ajax, now aware of who they were, greeted them properly. Noah, is there something you've come for? Why don't we go inside and talk? All right. Noah nodded. Ajax led them into a wooden building that looked relatively new. He hadn't noticed it on his last visit, so it must have been added when the Eternals repaired the village. Inside, the room was modest, a conference space with a large circular table in the center and chairs arrayed around it. Makari, bring one more chair, Ajax signed as everyone entered. The room had been built to match the conference chamber in the Domo. It held exactly 10 chairs, the original number of Eternals. Now only 8 Eternals remained, and with Noah and the 2 humans present, there were 11 people for 10 chairs, one short. Makari nodded. To Tony and Banner's astonishment, she blinked and was gone in a blur. A heartbeat later, she reappeared with an extra chair beside her. Makari is the fastest of our Eternals, Ajax explained, seeing their surprised faces. She is also deaf and mute. Deaf and mute? Banner and Tony exchanged looks. Even with all their power and tech, the Eternals could have someone with such a disability. Tony made a quick sign, hello, and Makari smiled and returned the gesture in sign language. Banner mimicked Tony's motion. He didn't actually know sign language, but when Tony mouthed hello, he followed along. Tony, you know sign language? Banner whispered once they were seated. Just that one phrase. It's amusingly useful, Tony whispered back. Pepper had taught it to him long ago at charity events where he'd met people with hearing impairments. After everyone settled, Noah began. Ajax, it looks like you've handled everything that needed to be handled. He meant the village repairs and Phastos' funeral. Both had been completed in a short span. Yes, Ajax said, the minor matters are done. Now we can move on to what matters most. Noah, she nodded. But before we act against the Celestials, I have news you'll want to hear. Noah raised his hand. A bronze gauntlet materialized in his palm. Chapter 422, Discussion of Plans for the Deviants. Noah set his hand on the table and opened his palm. A bronze gauntlet materialized there, the detector he'd borrowed from Ajax. He had already analyzed its technology and built a superior device of his own, so he no longer needed the original. As he pushed the gauntlet with a finger, a faint aura wrapped around it, and it floated slowly across the table into Ajax's hands. No one else saw how it had appeared. It simply arrived as if by magic. Ajax, I've finished using the detector, Noah said. I've also located the remaining deviants on Earth. He let his fingers interlace on the tabletop and fixed the Eternal opposite him with a steady look. When I go after the Celestials at the core, I intend to take care of the deviants on Earth too. Those things are too dangerous to remain. At the news, the Eternals around the table reacted. Makari, who was deaf, couldn't hear Noah, so Druig translated his words into sign language for her. The others murmured among themselves, all agreeing with Noah's proposal. The deviants had been their enemy for millennia, and they had lost one of their own to them. Their immediate response was driven by the desire to avenge Phastos. Ajax folded her hands and asked, "Since you've already located them, what do you need us to do?" Noah hesitated for only a moment before continuing. "There are only about 3,000 deviants left scattered around the globe." "A few thousand," Ajax said slowly. "Not a negligible number." They'd spent thousands of years hunting the deviants. By the time the team broke apart, they had believed the creatures eradicated. To learn that over 3,000 still existed was disquieting. Had they been reproducing in secret, or had the Eternals simply missed them? "No," Noah said. "There's more. Among them is a leader-level deviant. It's the one that killed your companion and absorbed energy from their body. I believe it has developed intelligence. It's likely been directing the other deviants." The room fell quiet. Intelligence? A leader? The deviants had always been brutal, animalistic, easy to track and dispose of. The possibility that one had evolved cunning and could absorb and use others' powers was new and terrifying. Banner and Tony, standing nearby, exchanged puzzled looks. They had only just begun to understand the data. Noah's report contained far more than any of them had expected. Ajax's expression hardened. "Are you certain?" "No," Noah corrected gently. "Yes, I'm very sure, and it looks like it's gathering the deviants toward itself." He tapped the table lightly, and strands of magic pooled into a globe above the surface. A projection of Earth hovered there, identical to the scanner readout from the island lab. Hundreds of red dots dotted the map. Each had a red arrow pointing in one direction, toward a large concentration of red over Alaska. Ajax's voice was grim. "If they all converge, that will be a serious threat." "No," Noah said, meeting her eyes. "If they gather, we have a chance to eliminate them all at once." Ajax closed her eyes briefly and let out a breath, the tension on her face easing. "All right, since you've found them, how do you propose we act? How should the Eternals coordinate with you?" She already knew Noah's capabilities exceeded most of theirs. He wouldn't present the problem without a plan. The others leaned forward as Noah prepared to outline the next steps. Chapter 423. Use a nuclear bomb? "It seems, Noah, you already have a clear plan of action. How do you think we Eternals should cooperate with you?" Ajax asked when she saw how confident Noah looked. Noah briefly outlined his plan to Ajax and the other Eternals. Tony and Banner listened as well. The plan wasn't much different from what they had discussed earlier in the lab. Noah's idea was simple. There was no need to stop the deviant from gathering his kind. Let them summon everyone. This massing would be an opportunity. If all the deviants assembled in one place, Noah could wipe them out in a single decisive strike. What he wanted from the Eternals was limited: help clear out the deviants who posed immediate threats to humans. If the Eternals wanted revenge and chose to kill more deviants, even those on the right path, Noah wouldn't object. More casualties among the deviants only helped his objectives. The proposal was bold and risky. A short, thoughtful silence fell over the meeting room as the Eternals exchanged glances, weighing feasibility and danger. Ajax assumed Noah had confidence. After all, he'd witnessed the deviant's power, but she held back her own judgment to hear from the others. Gilgamesh, the Eternals' fiercest warrior, broke the silence first. "Noah, your plan is bold and direct," he said in a deep voice. "But if we let them gather, they could become a concentrated force very quickly. That would be a huge challenge for us." Even Gilgamesh doubted he could take on multiple powerful deviants at once. If the numbers rose, there was only one likely outcome: the strongest deviants would tear them apart. He respected Noah's strength, but he wasn't sure it would be enough against thousands of deviants. Before Noah could respond, Kingo spoke up from nearby. "We don't necessarily have to fight all of them ourselves," he said. "Let them gather, then hit them with heavy weapons, human weapons. Nuclear bombs, if we can get them." He looked toward Tony. "Stark, Iron Man, surely you can get nuclear weapons, right?" Tony leaned back in his chair, spreading his hands. No nuclear bombs. I really can't get nuclear bombs. He explained. In theory, he could understand and even build nuclear technology, having created the arc reactor and worked with controlled fusion. In practice, nuclear weapons aren't something a private developer or company can just manufacture. Only certain sovereign states legally possess them, and even countries with the know-how can't privately build and deploy nuclear arms. The U.S. government already eyed Tony warily. He'd refused to turn over his Iron Man tech and had strained relations with the state, so producing a nuclear bomb covertly would be all but impossible. If push came to shove, Tony thought he might be able to brief Fury on the deviant threat and try to convince him to obtain military ordinances, but nuclear weapons weren't something Tony could promise. Kingo recovered quickly. Other heavy weapons will do. Missiles, whatever you can get. That I can do, Tony said after a beat. He hadn't dealt with nuclear bombs, but missiles were another story. Before he became Iron Man, Tony had effectively been an arms dealer. Stark Industries' weapons division was famous worldwide. After seeing the destruction his weapons caused, Tony had shut down the weapons arm and refocused the company on energy, but the expertise and blueprints remained. He could still covertly produce powerful missiles if needed, the Jericho missiles he demonstrated years ago being a prime example. Tony remembered the Jericho's capabilities, a cluster warhead that released many submunitions after launch, able to blanket a small hillside with strikes. If used against deviants, that kind of saturation might be effective. Of course, the deviants' bodies were far tougher than ordinary targets, so they might require enhanced warheads or greater yield to be lethal. He let the idea hang in the air, using heavy, high-yield missiles to blunt the deviant threat, while the Eternals considered the balance of risk and reward. For Tony, this stretch of his life as Iron Man felt like a turning point. He had started out fighting terrorists in war zones, then spent time battling robots and weaponized suits. Now his opponents were aliens, first the Chitauri, and now the Deviants. As the threats grew more powerful, his suits had to keep up. He had been upgrading his armor constantly. The destroyer armor he'd acquired, the Mark 17 Heartbreaker, Tony already had plans for more suits. But after the recent conversation, a new idea had taken shape in his head. Maybe he should pick up his old business again. Not for profit this time, but to manufacture weapons and tech powerful enough to deal with these alien-level threats. The idea cleared and hardened in his mind until he found himself nodding to himself. He'd have to talk this through with Pepper when he got back. Banner, who had been standing nearby, noticed the sudden resolve on Tony's face and looked at him quizzically. Tony had gone quiet, lost in thought, and Banner couldn't read him. Noah, who had been listening to the exchange, spoke up. You don't need nukes or missiles. Take out the deviants while they're still scattered and leave the rest to me. His voice was measured, absolute in confidence. It wasn't arrogance. Noah had the strength to back it up. With the system augmenting him and 2 Infinity Stones at his side, dozens more deviants wouldn't pose a real threat. There were very few beings left in this universe who could make him uneasy. Ajak, this shouldn't be hard for you Eternals, right? Noah asked. At that, the holographic projection before them, drained of Noah's magic, flickered and faded. Ajax smiled faintly. Handling deviants is what we do. We've been doing it for millennia, she said. Her confidence was mirrored by the rest of the Eternals. To them, fighting deviants was a routine, almost biological duty. If you counted the time before their memories were erased as well, their team had been at it for an unknowable length of time. Noah nodded. Good. I've transmitted the deviants' locations to the detector. Pick the targets you want to handle. He tapped the bronze arm guard he'd handed them earlier as he spoke. With Eternals, who specialized in deviants joining the operation, the mission suddenly looked a lot more manageable. Then Ajax delivered the bad news. Noah, we can take them, but the locations are too far apart. We can't hop between them the way we used to. Noah frowned. What did she mean? They couldn't move between places. Didn't the Eternals have a ship? Our domo was destroyed, Ajax said. No one can repair it now. Apart from Makari, none of us can reach those sites. Destroyed? Noah's confusion sharpened into anger. When? Who did it? Day before yesterday, Ajax answered. Noah replayed the timeline in his head and guessed the culprit. Icarus? Ajak closed her eyes and shook her head. Yes, he found and destroyed the domo before he came to find us, to keep us from leaving. The domo had been with them for ages. Ajak's voice carried a kind of grief. With Fastos, the only one capable of repairing the ship, dead, she didn't know what they could do. Tony and Banner both registered the name. They'd seen that controlled Eternal in Noah's lab earlier. Wasn't that Icarus? Noah had warned them explicitly not to tell the Eternals that he had Icarus under his control, so both tried to keep their reactions small. A few fleeting expressions slipped across their faces, which some of the Eternals noticed, but they assumed it was simply surprise at the news about the domo. Noah thought Icarus a real problem. When this was over, he decided he'd strip Icarus down and rebuild him, turn him into a biological automaton, something obedient and useful. For now, he needed facts. "How bad is the damage?" he asked. Ajak retrieved her phone and handed it to him. He turned it over, and Tony and Banner leaned closer. The image showed the domo's wreckage. From a distance, the ship didn't look completely blown apart, but a massive crack split it down the middle. The slab-like vessel lay in two halves, the hull cleanly severed. It looked as if Icarus had fired cosmic energy from his eyes and sliced the domo in two. Noah looked at the photo and then at the faces around him. Without the ship and with Fastos gone, most of the Eternals were effectively grounded on Earth. Only Makari, fast enough to make the trips, could still reach the scattered deviant sites. The rest would be stuck. It changed the mission. It changed everything. But it didn't change the goal. They wouldn't let the Lost World fall because of one man's rage. Chapter 425, Upper Kamartaj. The domo has been destroyed, so we can no longer travel quickly across Earth as before. Noah hadn't expected Icarus to accomplish something so catastrophic. It was clear Icarus had meant to wipe out the other Eternals. First, he shattered the domo, cutting off any retreat. Then he used the power Ereshim granted him to control or kill his former companions. Noah had been there when it happened, so Icarus's plan had failed in the end. Icarus himself became a puppet. Still, what he'd done had crippled them. Without the domo, they couldn't launch the rapid strikes against the deviants they once could. Right now, only Makari could reach a battlefield fast enough to be useful, and even that came with problems. As a speedster, Makari could cross the globe in an instant, but her combat ability wasn't exceptional. She might handle ordinary deviants by outpacing them, but the enhanced deviants, the ones Crow had accelerated, posed a real threat. Makari had nearly been overwhelmed by a single enhanced toxic lizard deviant before. Ajak didn't want to send her out alone. They'd already lost one companion, and before their betrayal of the Celestials' resurrection had been a safeguard. Now, death was final. Ajak handed Noah a photo on her phone, the domo, split in half. Fastos, the only Eternal who knew how to repair their ship, was gone. Even with Tony Stark, Bruce Banner, and others working on it, Noah doubted they could make the domo spaceworthy again without studying Eternal technology for a long time. Then an idea occurred to him. If only Fastos could repair the ship, why not find Fastos himself? Noah didn't mean summoning a soul. Whether Eternals even had souls, and whether a Celestial would recycle them after death, was immaterial. He meant the deviant who had absorbed Fastos' cosmic energy. In the original timeline, Noah had already realized that a deviant who absorbs an Eternal's cosmic energy often inherits the Eternal's memories. That deviant should know how the domo worked. Better still, Noah could use the Mind Stone to control that deviant, just as he had controlled Icarus. He wouldn't be restoring the Eternal's ship out of altruism. The deviant, armed with Fastos' memories and knowledge, would be a priceless asset to Noah's research team. Noah hesitated over one uncertainty. Did absorbing Fastos' cosmic energy confer only memories, or did it also grant the living, adaptive creativity of a scientist? Was the deviant merely a book of Fastos' lifetime of knowledge, or would it have the inventive spark, the talent, the sort of genius legends like Heimerdinger represented? If it were only memories, the benefit might be less than hoped. Even so, a book of one Eternal's research would still be an enormous advantage. Noah decided it was worth pursuing. The more immediate problem, however, was mobility. Since your ship can't move, how about we switch to a different mode of transportation? Tony offered. He'd just seen the image of the battle-damaged domo and felt it was a shame. If he could, he'd study the wreckage, but for the campaign ahead, he wanted something practical. I might be able to borrow a Quinjet from Nick Fury. That, Tony said. He thought a S-Shield Quinjet was the best human transport he knew of. A Quinjet? Ajak and the others had never seen one. Confused expressions crossed their faces. Tony's idea was sensible, but Noah found it too slow. Even the fastest aircraft would still take time to get where the deviants were. The real advantage they needed was instantaneous movement, teleportation. Open a portal from here to there and skip the travel entirely. Noah wasn't going to be their portal every time, though. Aside from his family, the only people on Earth who could reliably open such portals were the sorcerers of Kamartaj. Noah decided to involve Kamartaj. He would take the Eternals there and ask the Ancient One for assistance. The Order had always been reclusive, only stepping in for threats from other dimensions, but these deviants were beyond ordinary terrestrial enemies. They deserved Kamartaj's attention. With the sorcerer's help, the Eternals could reach battlefields whenever and wherever they were needed. Chapter 426, Kamartaj Team Building Activities. Noah remembered that in the film, after the Ancient One died and Strange became Sorcerer Supreme, Kamartaj stopped being as reclusive as it used to be. Strange's confrontation with Odin, Thor, and Loki had shown the world a different, more proactive face of the Order. Noah wasn't sure whether the Ancient One had been too relaxed, or whether Strange, new to the office, wanted to demonstrate the Sorcerer Supreme's authority by dealing directly with Asgardian royals. Either way, the arrival of the Celestials made the choice obvious. No matter how secluded Kamartaj preferred to remain, they had a duty to act. Their mission was to protect Earth. If Earth ceased to exist, there would be nothing left to protect. Banner shivered as white flakes fell from the sky and wrapped his arms around his chest. "What is this place?" he asked. When Noah suggested asking the sorcerers of Kamartaj for help, surprise rippled across the group. Everyone had heard of Kamartaj. Tony and Banner had listened to Noah talk about it. The Eternal had heard Ajak mention the place long ago, but none of them had actually seen it. Curious now, Tony and Banner had asked Noah to bring them along. Even the Eternal had grown interested, so Noah had led a sizable party to pay a visit. Because so many of them were arriving at once, Noah didn't bother opening a teleport gate inside Kamartaj. That would be impolite. He opened the portal outside and guided everyone through. They stepped out into a momentary flip of worlds. Daylight became night, the sun became a pale moon, and the humid tropical rainforest they'd been in turned instantly into a world of ice and snow. Banner, at the moment the only one in normal human form, looked distinctly uncomfortable. Noah glanced up. Every time he came here, it seemed to be night. Most of his work was in the Western Hemisphere, so his visits to the East came at odd hours. "It's just after 8 here," he said. "The Ancient One should still be awake." Tony stamped through the snow, leaving a trail of deep footprints, and peered around. "This looks like a tiny mountain village. Where's Kamartaj?" Noah smiled. From the outside, it did look modest, but that was the point. "We're in Nepal," he said. "Places like this are easy to overlook. That's why they call themselves reclusive." He led the party toward a building that, in his memory, hid the passage into Kamartaj. Kingo's assistant, the photographer, trailed behind, filming everything. They squeezed into a narrow alley, a dozen of them, Noah, Tony, Banner, the Eternal, and the others, making the passage feel even tighter. They stopped before a small wooden door. Tony stared up at it, surprised to find it shorter than he was even in his suit. "This is Kamartaj?" he asked incredulously. Tony hovered up a little on his suit thrusters to get a better look. Nothing about the exterior seemed remarkable. He muttered that Noah must have the wrong address. Banner warned him to come down and not attract attention. This village, though quiet because of the cold, still had people indoors, and a dozen strangers would make a commotion. Noah took a moment to use a small trick he had learned at Kamartaj. With a subtle weave of enchantment, he cast a charm he called Dispelling Idle People, which blurred the villagers' perception enough that they ignored the group entirely. Tony landed without protest. He didn't voice his doubts further. Being here, around sorcerers, he'd learned to expect things that defied his expectations. Noah reached for the door to knock, but before his knuckles could rap, it opened from the inside. A plain-clad sorcerer bowed politely and announced, "Sorcerer Ancient One invites the guests to gather in the main hall." Noah nodded. Of course, the Ancient One already knew they'd arrived. This was her domain. Nothing escaped her notice. He led the party through the door. What met them inside was nothing like the narrow alley had suggested. They stepped through and into another world. Chapter 427, preparing to enter the inner temple. At first glance, the mysterious Camartage seemed nothing more than a small, slightly dilapidated house. Everyone was puzzled, but when they stepped through a wooden door, its edges cracked. The sight that met them left them stunned. Inside was a vast complex of staggered, ancient Chinese-style pavilions. Upturned eaves, carved beams, painted rafters, all radiating timeless charm. The whole place could have been pulled from the Camartage scene in Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, the one where Wanda attacks the sanctuary. Directly ahead lay a marble square. Beyond two massive bronze incense burners, dozens of cloaked sorcerers moved in synchronized night practice across the plaza. The precision of their motions was powerful and imposing. A dark-skinned sorcerer stood before the formation with his hands folded behind his back, directing the group, Mordo. Noah guided the party deeper into the sanctum. The Eternals among them weren't especially surprised by the archaic architecture. Having watched civilization evolve from archaic timber structures to modern steel and concrete, the style didn't faze them. It was the sorcerers themselves that drew most of their attention. Tony and Banner were excited. Tony immediately told Jarvis to start recording everything. He wanted to document every oddity. How could such a small exterior hide such an enormous interior? Was it some kind of space expansion technology? No, this was sorcery. It must be spatial magic. Even odder, when Tony checked with Jarvis, the AI said it still had an outside connection and was even detecting a Wi-Fi signal inside the temple. Tony blinked. Did sorcerers here surf the net? It seemed oddly modern for the setting. Tony kept scanning and narrating so Jarvis could capture as much as possible. Among Noah's group, Kingo's personal assistant, Curran, would normally have been recording too, but Noah had stopped him before they entered. Camartage was an isolated order. Recordings weren't allowed. Curran had sulked away, only to reappear later having overslept. When he saw Tony in the suit, he couldn't resist snapping a photo. Mordo approached the group after spotting them. "Noah, long time no see," he said. "Noah," Noah replied. "The Ancient One is waiting in the front hall. Please, this way." Mordo stepped aside and motioned them toward the main hall. As they moved, everyone stared at Mordo and the contingent of sorcerers behind him. Something else stood out. Many of the practitioners bore physical impairments, missing hands or feet, but their movements remained steady, precise. "Focus," Mordo barked the moment their attention drifted. The distraction had been noticed. The penalty was an extra hour or two of practice that night. After they passed the training ground, Tony hung back with Noah to ask, hesitating over his choice of words. "Noah, why do they seem to be practicing? Kung Fu? Is that the right word?" Noah smiled. "Yes, their drills are very much like martial arts." Tony looked amused and a little bewildered. "I thought this was a sorcerer's order. Is this Shaolin?" A lot of foreigners associated martial arts with Shaolin thanks to old films. Noah shook his head. "This is Camartage. Their practice combines magic and martial training. A stronger body lets them channel and withstand more of the Vishanti's power." They climbed the stone steps toward the main hall, as Noah explained. The sorcerers here derived power from the Vishanti. Physical conditioning amplified their ability to handle that power. Tony stared, speechless. The image of wand-waving, robe-clad mystics had been replaced by bulky, disciplined fighters who looked ready to throw a punch with flames in their palms. "This place is weird," he said. Banner, who had been quietly observing since they arrived, finally spoke up. "It's almost like the Buddhist idea of containing Mount Meru in a mustard seed or hiding the sun and moon in a pot," he mused, referring to the way a vast world can be concealed in something small. Chapter 428, Lend a Helping Hand. This place feels like something out of Buddhist scripture, a mustard seed that contains Mount Sumeru, a pot that holds the sun and moon. After Banner spoke up, Ajak, who was leading the Eternals contingent, looked around into the line with feeling. Noah blinked. "You know Chinese?" Ajak smiled. I spent some time in China long ago, so of course I know a little. The phrase she'd used was drawn from Buddhist thought, the same idea that some fantasy novels borrow when they describe spatial rings or pocket dimensions. Noah thought for a moment. Over the centuries, the Eternals had traveled everywhere on Earth. It made sense they'd picked up many languages. That explains a lot, he said. Banner and Tony, who didn't understand Chinese, looked puzzled. Tony, however, had Jarvis running a translation feed and could see what Ajak had said. Noah shook his head when Banner asked what Ajak meant. It's a kind of magic that expands space. Exactly how it works, I don't know yet. This Kamartaj outpost had been here for thousands of years. What the Sorcerer Supreme had to make it so, Noah couldn't say. In a private thought, he considered whether the Space Stone might reproduce or even collapse this kind of expanded space, but he had no quarrel with the Ancient One and left the idea alone. They climbed the long stone steps and reached the grand hall. Noah could already see the Ancient One sitting on the main seat at the back, wearing her usual sorcerer robes and smiling as she watched them approach. Below the dais, wooden chairs had been arrayed in 2 rows with small tables between them. Teacups sat on the tables, waiting to be filled. Noah hadn't noticed them on his last visit. It seemed the Ancient One had prepared ahead after learning they would arrive. There were exactly 12 chairs, precisely the number in their party. "Welcome, travelers." As the group filed in, the Ancient One was the first to speak. Noah stepped forward. "Everyone, this is the Sorcerer Supreme of Kamartaj." They greeted her in turn. "Please, sit. No need to be so formal," she said, warm and unpretentious. Her demeanor reminded Noah of the scene from the movie, the Ancient One pouring tea and being unexpectedly approachable. A middle-aged sorcerer, with his hair tied back, appeared at the side carrying a steaming teapot. He moved down the rows, pouring tea into the waiting cups. The Ancient One inclined her head to him. "Thank you." He bowed in return and slipped back out of the hall. The Ancient One scanned the faces around the room and then, with a smile, asked, "Does anyone have questions?" All eyes flicked to Banner. He'd been staring at her, caught between curiosity and awe. The attention made him uncomfortable. Banner cleared his throat. Sorcerer Ancient One, I don't have any big questions. I just imagined the Sorcerer Supreme would be different." "Oh," she replied. "How did you imagine her?" Banner hesitated, glancing at the others. "Well, I kinda expected maybe a halo." He gave an awkward laugh and scratched his head. The Ancient One chuckled. "I am not a Buddha. There will be no halo. I am human, like you. I studied the ways of Kamartaj, and by practice and choice became the Sorcerer Supreme." Noah listened and smiled inwardly. She might speak modestly, but he also knew she was far from ordinary. Her mastery of magic, her ability to contend with dimensional entities, the power she wielded and borrowed. There was a difference between her everyday manner and the way she must move in combat. The movie had shown that. He had not yet seen that side of her himself. After the little exchange, the Ancient One's gaze turned to Noah. She could sense strong auras among the visitors and, on seeing Ajak, had already guessed part of their identity. "Noah, what brings you here? And you've brought many guests," she said. "Noah, what brings you here this time? And you've brought so many guests," she repeated with a hint of curiosity. Noah met her eyes and answered simply, "Sorcerer Ancient One, we've come because we need Kamartaj's help." Chapter 429. Agree. Sorcerer Ancient One, we came because we want Kamartaj to lend us a hand. Noah's voice echoed through the main hall. The Ancient One's expression flickered with surprise at first, then smoothed into calm. She set down the teacup she had been about to lift and inclined her head, listening intently. "Noah, what exactly do you need? Explain it to me." Noah took a breath and began. "A few days ago, the Deviants, those ancient foes of the Eternals, had reappeared on Earth. They hadn't just resurfaced, they had killed a member of the Eternals. Their leader was now trying to rally the Deviants into a force that could threaten Earth and humanity." The Ancient One's brows drew together. She knew the Celestials had spawned both the Eternals and the Deviants. She knew how dangerous the Deviants could be. "They've killed an Eternal?" she said softly. She offered a solemn nod and voiced her condolences for Ajak and the fallen Eternal. It was deeply troubling. In the centuries of conflict between those two races, she had not expected an Eternal to fall to the deviants. Something must have changed among them. Before Noah could say more, the Ancient One's mind was already turning through the old records she had studied. Previous Sorcerers Supremes had encountered the deviants and had even coordinated with the Eternals against them. Those records described creatures of immense size and strength, with relentless vitality, wildly varied physiologies, and potent evolutionary capacities that let them become grotesquely different from one another. If the deviants were regrouping now, Earth would face a very serious problem. "So how do you want Kamartaj to help?" she asked. Noah explained the crux of the problem. The Eternals' ship had been destroyed, leaving them unable to teleport rapidly across the planet. That loss severely limited their ability to respond to deviant outbreaks. His request was simple. He wanted Kamartaj's sorcerers to open teleportation portals to move Eternals quickly to wherever they were needed. He wasn't asking Kamartaj's mages to fight, only to provide rapid transport, but if any of them wished to join the fight, he would not stop them. The Ancient One considered that. Teleportation was a core discipline at Kamartaj. Every student learned it, and after years of practice, their skill was reliable. If Noah had asked for the Time Stone, she would have hesitated, but asking for personnel assistance was different. This was right at the edge of what Kamartaj would intervene in. The threat directly affected Earth and humanity. "I understand," she said slowly. "I will have Kamartaj's mages assist you against the deviants." She would outline to the mages that they were not being compelled to take arms. Many at Kamartaj sought refuge there, having fled a world too rough for their tastes, and she would respect those who preferred not to be sent into conflict. But she'd also encourage those who wanted to test themselves to step forward. After decades of limiting interference with other dimensions and threats, the mages had had little opportunity for real battle. This would be a chance to measure their training against a genuine enemy. The Ancient One admitted to herself that her retirement was approaching, and she wanted the next Sorcerer Supreme to inherit a strong, experienced order. The arrival of new, unpredictable forces in the world had blurred many of the certainties she once felt, and it made her more determined to prepare Kamartaj for whatever came next. Noah let out a breath of relief. The Ancient One would not only approve the request, she would marshal the resources to do it. Teleportation support from Kamartaj would let Tony, Banner, and the remaining Eternals redeploy rapidly to where they were needed without relying solely on Noah to open every portal himself. The Ancient One nodded again, gravely and clearly. "We will help. I will explain the situation to the mages, and they can decide whether to take part in combat. For now, we will provide the means to move the Eternals where they must go." Noah bowed his head in thanks. The path forward was clearer now. With Kamartaj's portals, the Eternals' response would be faster, and humanity would have more of a chance against a deviant resurgence. Chapter 430. Send everyone away and listen to the storm. I will have the sorcerers of Kamartaj assist you. The Ancient One nodded at Noah's suggestion, and smiles spread across the faces of the Eternals. They were pleased, relieved even, to have such powerful allies. After Phastos' death, some of them had wanted to strike back at the deviants, but with their ship damaged, that plan had been hard to execute. Now, with sorcerers joining them, they could pursue it again. Gilgamesh even clapped his hands in excitement. Noah nodded in thanks, then hesitated for a moment. There was another matter he needed to discuss with the Ancient One, something too sensitive to say in front of everyone. He cleared his throat to draw attention and turned to Banner and Tony. "Tony, Banner," he said casually, "didn't you both want to see if you have an aptitude for magic? We're at Kamartaj. Why not try it while we're here?" Tony and Banner had indeed expressed that curiosity before. The display of raw, arcane power they'd watched earlier had been impressive. Both men were quietly interested in whether they could tap into it. Tony wasn't slow to read the situation. Noah's sudden suggestion was a polite way to send them away. Noah and the Ancient One had something private to discuss. Noah glanced at Ajak across the table and motioned at her. Ajak understood immediately. She was to excuse her fellow Eternals as well. Uncertain why Noah wanted her to stay, was it about the Celestials? She nevertheless told her companions to join Tony and Banner and take in the wonders of Camartage. The Ancient One summoned one of her sorcerers, the one who had been serving tea, Shang-Chi. "Shang-Chi, please take our guests on a tour of Camartage," she said. "If anyone needs anything, ask him." "All right," Tony said, standing. Before leaving, he lifted the teacup beside him and drained it in one long swallow. He had already opened his helmet upon entering Camartage. Iron Man's identity was no secret. He set the cup back on the table and walked off with Shang-Chi, Banner trailing behind, more taciturn as ever. Noah watched Tony go, a small smile twitching at his lips when he noticed the teacup left behind, but he said nothing. The Eternals also rose without complaint, curious to see the human sorcerer's domain, and followed Shang-Chi out of the main hall. The room emptied until only Noah, the Ancient One, and Ajak remained. "Ms. Ajak, it's been a while," the Ancient One said once the others had gone. Earlier, when they first entered, Noah had stated their purpose quickly, and there hadn't been time for courtesies. "It has," Ajak replied. She remembered the last time she'd met the Ancient One. The sorcerer had come to speak of the Celestials and had mentioned a young man who would come to her. That young man had been Noah. He had arrived in time to save her later from Akaris, otherwise she might have been devoured by deviants like Phastos. "Noah, you asked everyone to leave. Do you want to discuss something important?" Ajak asked, turning to him. "Miss Ajak, please, don't be impatient," the Ancient One said with a faint smile before Noah could answer. She raised a hand. The sleeve of her robe slid back and an orange sigil bloomed on her palm. A slender whip of energy lashed out from the circle and flicked across the table toward Tony's teacup. Its tail curled around the cup and drew it back into the Ancient One's hand. The sigil vanished. She turned the cup over and inspected its bottom. A small, round, silver device had been affixed there. Against the dark brown ceramic, it looked obvious. The Ancient One plucked the device off with practiced ease, smiling. "Mr. Stark," she said lightly, "silver and brown aren't the most tasteful combination, and such petty tricks have no effect on me." Tony froze a few yards down the corridor, following the others. From the wiretap he'd planted, a voice he did not want to hear suddenly came through. Jarvis's voice chimed into his ear. "Sir, the location of the wiretapping device has moved. It appears to have been detected." "Jarvis, don't say any more." "I know," Tony muttered, face tightening in a mix of embarrassment and alarm. Banner nearby misinterpreted Tony's quiet muttering for a remark to himself. "Tony, what do you mean?" "Nothing, Banner." Tony brushed him off, already hearing the wiretap again. "This wiretap isn't an issue," the Ancient One's voice said calmly through the device, its fragile, controlled tone carrying a weight that made Tony feel exposed. "But I request that anything recorded about Camartage not be shared outside. Camartage wishes not to be disturbed by the world." Tony could feel the pressure behind that polite phrasing. He opened his mouth to argue, and then static sizzled through the connection. Jarvis replied in his typically efficient tone. "Understood. Jarvis suggests backing up a research plan for a wiretap camouflage disguise function." "Do it," Tony said before he could stop himself. Half order, half nervous habit. With a few deft movements, the Ancient One tossed the tiny device into a shimmering teleportation portal. It vanished, gone from Earth, perhaps to some other plane. "All right, Noah," the Ancient One said, folding her hands and looking at him. "Let's continue." Chapter 431, Turn Back the Clock on Earth. Noah smiled as he watched the tiny bug Tony had left behind get tossed into a portal by the Ancient One. He had noticed Tony's little tricks earlier while Tony was sipping tea. Tony liked to use miniature bugs to eavesdrop. Noah had even seen it in the movies. The three present didn't make a fuss about Tony's habit, so the Ancient One merely teased him and flicked the bug away. From the ripple of energy as the portal opened, Noah sensed it didn't lead to anywhere on Earth. "Noah, let's continue." Once the portal closed, the Ancient One refocused on the conversation and turned to him. "Go on," she said. Noah nodded and picked up where he'd left off. "Ancient One, you remember what I told you about the Celestials, right?" She glanced at Ajak beside her and then back at Noah. "I encountered a Celestial not long ago, Aurelion the Judge. He's also the creator of the Eternals." "You actually confronted a Celestial?" The Ancient One's face showed a rare flash of shock, but there was no time for surprise to linger. If the Celestials have noticed this side of things— No, Noah cut in. Not yet, at least not formally. I expect Arisham the Judge or other Celestials will reach Earth soon. After my encounter with Arisham, someone on Ajax's team was turned, empowered to come here and interfere with us. He recounted the earlier betrayal and what had happened, while the Ancient One listened in silence, her expression growing more serious. Still, Noah continued, they haven't shown up immediately. I suspect something's delayed them, so they won't strike in the next few hours or days. That gives me a window to deal with the young Celestial growing in the Earth's core. The Ancient One rubbed her forehead. The news had unsettled her. She had not expected Earth to be drawn into the Celestial's presence so soon. Do you need Kamartaj's help? She asked after a moment. It was obvious why Noah had come to her. This threatened the whole planet, and she could not take it lightly. Noah explained his plan. I'll go after the Celestial in the core before Arisham arrives. I don't need you to intervene directly in that. But when the Celestials do arrive, I intend to stand and fight Arisham. I believe I can defeat them, but I can't guarantee Earth will survive the aftermath. He let her imagine the scale. Two beings that could casually rend stars would unleash forces neither human nor ordinary magic could easily contain. If the battle couldn't be shifted away from the planet, Earth itself might be destroyed in the crossfire. I don't want to beat them only to return and find Earth gone, Noah said. That's why I'm asking you, use the Time Stone. Use its power to protect Earth. Noah had felt, during his brief meeting with Arisham, the suppressive resonance between the Celestials and the Darkstar Thresh. He trusted Thresh could give him the upper hand against Arisham, but a victory could still generate catastrophic fallout. So he thought of the Time Stone in the Ancient One's possession. He thought of Doctor Strange's loop, how Strange, new to the role and facing Dormammu, used the Eye of Agamotto to trap the Dark Dimension Lord in an endless reset. If the Ancient One could cast a similar global loop or rewind in the event of catastrophic damage, they might protect Earth from permanent destruction. Time reversal. The Ancient One's brows tightened. Kamartaj had long studied forbidden time magics in small, careful steps, and as one of the longest-serving Sorcerer Supremes, she knew their breadth and their limits. She understood how daring Noah's request was. Applying loop magic to an entire planet was orders of magnitude harder than the localized temporal tricks Strange had used. Noah could see the weight of it in her face. She closed her eyes and took a slow breath, fingers tracing the faint circle of the Eye of Agamotto at her throat. It was clear she was thinking through possibilities and consequences, how to bend time on such a scale, what it would cost, and whether it would be enough. She opened her eyes, still troubled but deliberate. The decision would not be made lightly. Chapter 432, The Possibility of Global Time Reversal. Sorcerer Supreme, Ancient One? Is this impossible? Noah asked when he saw the hesitation in her face. If Ancient One couldn't put the whole Earth into a time reversal, he'd have to find another way. Maybe learn when the Celestials would arrive. Maybe use precognition or the Time Stone. But Ancient One didn't answer right away. After a moment's thought, she spoke. Noah, casting a spell over a planet as vast as Earth is extraordinarily difficult. I've never heard of anyone being able to do it, she said, opening her eyes. But after thinking it through, it may not be entirely impossible. Noah's hope flared again. Oh, how would you do it? Ancient One and Noah were talking while Miss Ajax, who had little understanding of sorcery, listened quietly at the side. Noah, you know how Kamartaj prevents interdimensional demons from invading Earth, yes? Ancient One asked, instead of immediately laying out the method. Dimensional demons? Noah reflected. Kamartaj keeps them out with a protective network anchored by the 3 sanctuaries, New York, London, and Hong Kong. The sanctuaries form a magic net that guards Earth. In the Doctor Strange incident, Dormammu only invaded after a sanctuary was destroyed. That's right, Ancient One continued. Through the work of successive Sorcerer Supremes, that protective magic enveloping Earth is Kamartaj's greatest safeguard against interdimensional intrusion. Noah was about to ask what that had to do with time magic when a thought hit him. The protective magic covers the entire Earth. Could they use it? You mean? If you want what you asked for, Noah, Casting planet-wide time magic, that's still a near impossible task for any one sorcerer. But if we work through the protective net that has guarded Earth for so long, there may be a slim chance, Ancient One said. I can go to the 3 sanctuaries before the Celestials arrive and attempt to rework the wards that bind them, turning that global protection into a time reversal spell. I can't guarantee it will succeed, and there's a serious downside. While the protective magic is being altered, even briefly, Earth will be exposed to the gaze of other interdimensional entities. Those who have long coveted our world may seize the opportunity. She explained that by modifying the magic that shields Earth from dimensional incursions, they could convert it into a time reversal that affected the entire planet. But during the modification, and while the time spell was active, Earth would lose its normal defenses. That would invite predators. Noah thought of the threats he already knew. Dormammu, Lord of the Dark Dimension, who bore intense hatred for Ancient One and sought to consume Earth into his realm, and Mephisto, ruler of the Hell Dimension, who preyed on sinful souls and, ever since Noah's previous actions, had likely added Noah himself to his list of interests. Noah weighed the danger Ancient One described. These beings rivaled even the Celestials in power. He did not want to face the Celestials, only to have Earth ambushed by a horde of dimensional invaders while its wards were compromised. As long as the time reversal can be enacted, wouldn't the Earth simply revert to the state before those demons invaded? Noah asked. Yes, but looping time repeatedly is not a solution. Those entities will keep coming. I would likely have to sustain and oversee the spell from within the sanctuaries continuously. Kamartaj's sorcerers alone cannot hold them back indefinitely, she said. If enemies come, we Eternals will stand with you on Earth and help defend it, Ajak said. Since the Eternals had freed themselves from the Celestials' absolute command, she no longer needed to follow Arisham the Judge's old restrictions against involvement outside direct missions. Thank you, Ajak, Ancient One replied with a small smile. If I can buy enough time, I'll deal with the Celestials and return, Noah said. The Darkstar Thresh experience card's duration increased to 5 hours after I devoured Celestial power a few times. That should be enough to handle the Celestials and get back to Earth to confront any dimensional incursions. Ancient One considered him. The plan is feasible, but this scale of magic is unlike ordinary time magic. Once cast, it cannot run autonomously or reverse time on a set loop. I will have to personally guide and decide when to reverse time. If I am interrupted during the process, the entire spell could unravel and collapse, leaving the planetary defenses broken and Earth dangerously exposed. Ajak's expression hardened. Then we defend the sanctuaries. The Eternals will hold the line while you work. Noah nodded. The risk was real, but it was their best option. They began to lay out the details. Who would go to which sanctuary, what wards needed altering, and how the Eternals and Kamartaj would coordinate defenses. Time was tight. More than that, it was precious, and every moment counted. Chapter 433, Enemies that can sense the flow of time. If interrupted during this process, the entire spell will fail. The Ancient One's eyes were closed as she spoke. The Eye of Agamotto hanging on her chest slowly opened, a faint green light spilling out. It looked as if she was narrating the plan while using the time stone to peer forward, measuring the possibilities that might unfold once the ritual began. Noah watched the time stone and nodded. If the Ancient One used that time loop magic, she would be immobilized. Nothing more than a stationary conduit, so they would need people around her to protect her while she held the loop in place. The image that sprang into his head was absurdly mundane, a tower defense game, with the Ancient One as the tower and the defenders holding back waves of attackers. The attackers, of course, would be the dimensional demons drawn to the anomaly. Not everyone can perceive a time loop. Noah thought of Strange's bargain in the Dark Dimension. When Strange trapped Dormammu in a loop, his own awareness did not encompass the countless deaths he endured. The loop rewound to the moment before he entered the Dark Dimension. Strange might have known the loop worked, but he didn't experience the infinite repetitions the way Dormammu did. Dormammu, by contrast, perceived the endless cycle and remembered every iteration. For him, Strange's use of the time stone effectively imprisoned him within that segment of time. If Dormammu wouldn't agree to Strange's terms, he would be trapped forever. Noah suspected that's also why Dormammu ultimately conceded. Although the idea of Dormammu surrendering is absurd, one plausible explanation is that Strange could have kept forcing the loop, destroying himself repeatedly until Dormammu relented, so Dormammu had little choice but to accept the terms. At any rate, entities like Dormammu can sense time being looped. They would search for its source and, sooner or later, locate the sorcerer responsible. That was when the tower defense scenario began in earnest. If that's the case, Noah said after a moment's thought, I'll arrange some defensive forces that can delay the dimensional demons long enough. He wouldn't be present himself, so he couldn't rely on many of Earth's usual heavy hitters. But if the goal was merely to slow the invaders temporarily, he could devise measures to buy time. The Ancient One opened her eyes as the green light faded. The floating eye of Agamotto sank lower, its eyelids closed, sealing the time stone. I will have the sorcerers prepare the necessary wards and defenses, she said. She had already used the time stone to observe some possible futures. While the visions involving the Celestials remained obscured, in most of the timelines she saw, Earth survived. That was enough for her. She sealed the stone and turned to planning. If power is required, the Eternals might assist, she suggested, looking at Ajak. If our help is needed, the Eternals will not refuse, Ajak replied with a warm smile. We have lived on Earth for so long, it is practically our second home. Noah considered the idea of bringing in Icarus. If the Eternals were involved, would including Icarus draw unwanted attention? Even disguised, a being as well known as Icarus might be recognized by those who knew him well. On the other hand, Icarus's power would be a tremendous asset. Noah estimated that, unleashed, Icarus might be able to resist a dimensional demon long enough to buy them precious seconds. The demons could not fully manifest their power in this universe, and much of their strength remained bound to their own dimension. I'll have to accelerate the modifications to Icarus when I get back, Noah thought. Icarus had been declared dead, so tampering with him wouldn't feel like violating the living, at least not to Noah. Besides, for someone who had built strategies around destroying the Earth, notions of humanity were hardly a constraint. Noah also weighed Asgard's involvement. If necessary, we could request aid from Asgard, he said. Odin himself could not directly intervene, but Thor, if roused, might be able to contend with the dimensional demons briefly. The difficulty was that Thor hadn't quite awakened yet. His resistance would be limited. This is very good news, the Ancient One said, smiling. With that, the three of them began outlining deployments, contingencies, and fallback positions, laying the spiritual fortifications and rallying allies who could hold the line while the time loop ritual ran its course. Exploring Camartage. The group that had followed Shang-Chi out of the main hall had been stopped in the courtyard they had passed earlier. Their guide had changed. Shang-Chi had returned to other duties, and Mordo now led them. This is the suspension ring, a vital tool for Camartage sorcerers. A robed practitioner stood before the small crowd, holding a shallow tray of antique bronze. Neatly arranged on it were several brass-colored rings, each suspended within its own carved socket. Mordo stood at his side, explaining the artifact's uses to the assembled visitors. This is a suspension ring, a tool used by Camartage sorcerers, Mordo said, addressing the gathered crowd as he lifted a ring from an antique bronze tray. Can you learn magic just by wearing that thing? Kingo called from the back, eyeing the strange band. Mordo smiled. A suspension ring is only an aid. You don't learn magic simply by putting one on. Sorcerers at Camartage can cast spells without a suspension ring, he explained, but the ring smooths the process and provides functions that can't easily be duplicated, opening teleportation portals, for example. A sorcerer needs a suspension ring to open certain portals. For some powerful magics, like the mirror dimension, the ring is indispensable. Without one, you can't leave once you enter. Mordo slipped the bronze band onto his left index and middle fingers, then faced the crowd. Mastering the suspension ring is important for every Camartage sorcerer. It helps us move between different worlds and universes. He turned slightly, held his left hand out with index and middle fingers raised and joined, the ring catching the light. His ring and pinky fingers curled slightly. His right hand mirrored the gesture a little behind the left, tracing a small, precise circle in the air. You have to focus your mind and picture it clearly. As his right hand moved, a few orange embers of magic flared in the air a short distance in front of him, and a circular teleportation portal opened, shimmering in orange. "Whoa!" A few people around the square exclaimed. Many had never seen such a thing. Tony and Banner, however, weren't surprised. They had seen portals appear like this before. The one thing that puzzled them was the color. The portal here was orange, whereas the portals they had seen previously had always been blue. Could the color be customized? This teleportation spell is one of the most basic for Camartage sorcerers, Mordo said, lowering his hands and turning to face the group. Who wants to try? This is also a way to test whether someone has a talent for magic. Almost everyone wanted to have a go. Me! Give me one too, hands shot up. Tony and Banner both asked for rings, and even Kingo's assistant Karen stepped forward. One by one, they slid the bronze suspension rings onto their left index and middle fingers and mimicked Mordo's hand positions. And then what? What do we do after putting the ring on, Mr. Mordo? Tony asked, as soon as the ring was on. The design felt awkward on his hand, but curiosity won. Do exactly as I did. Place your hand like this, and with the other hand, make the same motion. Close your eyes, wave the free hand, and visualize the portal opening. Picture the destination clearly. Mordo walked slowly among them, guiding the group. Do not limit your imagination to the world around you. The clearer the image in your mind, the faster the portal will form. Normally, Camartage sorcerers draw power from the Vishanti through a pact. Tony and the others had no such contract. But a suspension ring contains a trace of power itself, so wearing one can allow a person to open a simple teleportation portal by tapping the ring's reservoir. The group shut their eyes and began to visualize. They called up places that meant something to them, familiar, detailed scenes that would be easy to project. Slowly, a sound like crackling embers rose in the square. Mordo's eyes brightened. The ring test usually revealed those with a natural aptitude for magic. The first to produce sparks was Druig, the Eternal with strong psychic training, who steadied himself and summoned orange embers and a small portal with little effort. One by one, the other Eternals followed: Makari, Circe, Gilgamesh, and Thena. For beings created by Arishem, it seemed, aptitude for this kind of thing came easily. Within moments, sparks danced in front of each of the Eternals and small portals began to form. On the human side, things were quieter. Tony, Banner, and Karen concentrated, faces calm, hands moving the way Mordo had shown them. Mordo watched the three as the crackling grew faint. He had seen enough tests to know who would succeed quickly and who would not. Then, to everyone's surprise, a crackling sound louder than the rest came from Tony. Tiny sparks streamed out in front of him, and a circular portal began to open, orange like Mordo's demonstration. No one had their eyes open yet. They were all concentrating. Tony's portal widened slowly, a clear shimmer in the air. Mordo waited a moment, then called out, "All right, everyone, open your eyes." Chapter 435, almost became Pepper. "Everyone, you can open your eyes now," Mordo's voice rang out. Earlier, he had explained in detail how to open a teleporter with the sling ring. To help them visualize their destination, he'd had everyone close their eyes and picture the place while practicing the arm motions. After about a minute, he felt their attempts had run their course and called a halt. A few had already opened their eyes before he finished. Kingo and his assistant Callan and Makari had peeked early. Kingo and Callan, curious and theatrically coy, opened one eye as if sneaking a look, glancing around to see if Mordo had noticed. Mordo saw them, but neither scolded nor stopped them. These were guests of the Sorcerer Supreme, not Camartage students, so he didn't apply the same strict discipline. Makari, who was deaf and nonverbal, had opened her eyes because she couldn't sense the room with them shut. A druid standing nearby translated Mordo's words to her. When everyone had their eyes open, they looked forward. Some found a shimmering portal hovering before them. Others wore disappointment on their faces. Because the Eternals were created by the Celestials, almost all of them carried an innate affinity for magic and the patience of millennia, qualities that fit well with Camartage's practices, so most of the Eternals present managed to form a portal. "Oh, amazing!" Cersei exclaimed at the portal that had appeared. In her mind, she had pictured her living room in New York. She expected that stepping through would put her back home. Kingo laughed, delighted. I didn't expect I had the talent for this. Oh, Colin, what a pity. You don't seem to have it. He patted his assistant consolingly. When Kingo had opened his eyes earlier, there had only been fizzing orange sparks where a portal should be. Seeing others' portals had flustered him, so he closed his eyes, composed himself, and tried again. This time, when Mordo told them to open their eyes, a portal stood before him. Tony stared at the portal in front of him in disbelief. This is incredible. I can actually do this. He hadn't expected himself to open a sling ring portal. Apparently, he was not only a scientific genius, but had a talent for this magic too. He was still in his Iron Man armor, though he'd removed the gauntlet so he could slip the sling ring on. The image he had pictured was the top floor of Stark Tower. On that very top floor, Pepper Potts became alert when a portal punctured the room. It was a different color from the one that had appeared the day before, and she wasn't sure what that meant, but when she heard voices coming through, she moved closer to see. Through the shimmer, she could see Tony in his suit on the other side. Tony, she said, startled. Tony saw Pepper and blinked. She should indeed be on the top floor. He'd thought of the place casually, and almost as an afterthought it had appeared. Pepper? He said, equally surprised. Pepper started toward the portal. Tony, embarrassed and reflexive, waved his hand and the portal began to contract. Wait! Danger! Mordo's shout cut across the room. He hadn't expected Tony to learn how to close a portal without instruction. Closing one was simple enough, but doing it in this moment was dangerous. The sling ring portals of Camartage were convenient for travel, but in the wrong hands, they could become weapons. If a portal is shut while someone is partially inside it, the abrupt spatial edge behaves like a blade. The manual at Camartage warned explicitly, do not close a portal while someone is still transiting. Mordo was picturing the worst, someone stepping through as the portal collapsed and being grievously injured, the way Wong once closed a portal at the exact instant an enemy's arm was in it in past battles, severing limb from body. He feared that Tony's sudden attempt to shrink the portal might slice whoever was on the other side. Tony looked at Mordo, confused by the sudden urgency. What's wrong? Chapter 436, The Lost Banner, The Magical Genius, Tony? What's wrong? Tony had just waved his hand and watched the portal snap shut on its own when Mordo's shout came from nearby. The cry drew everyone's attention, those who were delighted they'd opened portals, and those frustrated they couldn't. Tony Stark, Mr. Stark, Mordo said, his face suddenly severe. Whether or not you'll be able to use the sling ring in the future, a warning to you all, when you make a portal, make sure you and everyone else have completely passed through before you close it. The spatial edge is razor sharp. If someone's half in and half out, it could slice them clean in two. Tony's stomach dropped. What? He understood instantly. He'd almost hurt Pepper. He'd almost killed her. The thought left a cold weight in his chest. If Pepper hadn't slowed down a bit, it would have been catastrophic. He stared at the sling ring on his hand and reminded himself to be more careful. Then he took it off and let out a heavy sigh. Around them, each of the others had a portal open. After Mordo's warning, they were chatting, curious and excited. Only two people hadn't opened a portal, the team's assistant from India and Bruce Banner. Banner? Tony turned to him. Banner looked embarrassed as he took his sling ring off. Ha, Tony, I guess I don't have any magic talent, he said awkwardly. Tony frowned. Banner was a genius in his own right. He could accept the assistant not being able to do it, but Banner? That doesn't make sense. I could do it. Why can't you? Bruce shrugged, looking helpless. I don't know. Everyone else could. It's a bit of a blow. Mordo walked over to them. Talent is important, he said, but so are a clear mind and a steady will. Mr. Banner, when you tried, did you truly picture yourself opening a portal? Well, now that you ask, I did get distracted, Banner admitted. Honestly, the idea that closing my eyes and waving my hand could open a spatial channel is beyond anything I've learned. It's unreasonable to me. He meant it. As a scientist, the notion of teleportation by hand was pure science fiction. It had happened before his eyes, but his brain was still trying to reconcile it with everything he knew. That's exactly the problem. Mordo smiled with understanding. Many who come to Camartage, shaped by the scientific education of their world, struggle at first to accept this new reality. Mr. Banner, as a scientist, it will be harder to shift your perceptions. But if you're willing to join Camartage, to open your mind and learn, I believe you can master this and discover the truth behind it. Join Camartage? Banner said. He glanced at the temple decor. There was a monastery-like feel, and thought of monks. Do you mean become a monk? No. Mordo waved a hand. We don't have strict religious rules. Life here is fairly relaxed, but we do practice morning, noon, and night. And we even have Wi-Fi if you want to go online. Wi-Fi? Banner blinked, surprised that such a place would have internet. No thanks. I'm busy. I'm not looking to live in seclusion. If life is good where you are, staying is a fine choice, Mordo said with a small smile. He continued, most of the people at Camartage are either orphans we took in, or folks who are unattached in their world, people searching for inner peace, physical healing, or a path forward. If someone comes with ill intent, we turn them away. Tony cut in. Master, one more question. He looked at Mordo. You said that if one's mind isn't steady, they can't open a portal, but I was kind of thinking all over the place earlier, so why could I do it? Mordo looked at Tony for a long moment. There's only one reason, he said plainly. Your talent for the mystic arts is very high. You're excellent material to become a sorcerer. Chapter 437. How much does a hanging ring cost? I have a magic talent? Tony's face lit up in surprise. Yes, Mr. Stark, Mordo said. From what you just did, you clearly have very high magical aptitude. For those who come to Camartage, opening a teleportation portal the first time you touch a suspension ring is a sign of exceptional talent. Even as a scientific supergenius, Tony had an aptitude for the mystic arts. After all, in some universes, he'd even taken Strange's place as Sorcerer Supreme. Still, the current record for raw magical talent belonged to Peter Parker's friend Ned. He opened a portal the first time he picked up a suspension ring, and even managed to open portals to other universes during a chaotic moment. That had been enough to convince everyone of Ned's gift. Oh, I didn't realize I was a magic prodigy. Tony's grin spread across his face. He was already enjoying the smugness, then remembered Banner hadn't managed to open a portal and coughed to stop his gloating. Tony, congratulations, Banner said, though he sounded genuinely unbothered. For Banner, the test had been curiosity rather than a life-defining measure. Congratulations for what? I'm not joining. Tony waved a hand and put the suspension ring back into Mordo's palm. Banner mirrored him and returned his ring as well. As Tony handed the ring back, he noticed the Eternals. Each of them had a portal open in front of them, chatting and laughing as if the ability was no big deal. Wait, Master Mordo, you said opening a portal means someone's a magic genius. Are all these people geniuses? Tony asked, suddenly feeling the label cheapened. There was a whole group of geniuses right in front of him. Mordo hesitated. Yes, they're all considered very gifted. He, too, was uneasy. It was rare to see even one person with that level of aptitude in years. Today, he'd seen a whole contingent. Tony, they're Eternals, Banner said, patting Tony on the shoulder with a smile. Their bodies aren't human. Maybe their physiology is just very suited to magic. Not human? Mordo frowned at Banner's remark. He had been wondering why these people were so different. They're Eternals, not ordinary humans, Tony answered briskly when he saw Mordo's confusion. Tony, can you say that? Banner murmured. It doesn't matter. This will come out soon enough. Tony shrugged. The Eternals and Camartage would soon be cooperating. The Masters would be opening portals to help the Eternals hunt deviants. Their differences would be discovered in the process, so Tony didn't feel guilty revealing it. Mordo nodded slowly. He'd briefly considered inviting them to train at Camartage. People like this would be incredible additions. But now that they were clearly alien, he wasn't sure it was his place to recruit them. There was no precedent for enrolling other species. That was a question for the Ancient One. There had been at least one alien who used Camartage magic in the films. During a Raiders break-in on Star-Lord's ship, a Raider in the team displayed Camartage-style sorcery, though the movie never explained how that came to be. It had likely just been a cameo from the comics. After giving everyone a taste of what being a Camartage adept felt like, Mordo began collecting the suspension rings. They were Camartage treasures, not handed out to outsiders. Only members of Camartage received their own ring. Tony watched as Mordo set the rings, one by one, back onto the copper plate, rubbed his chin, and asked, "Mordo, does Camartage sell these suspension rings?" He wanted one badly. With a ring, he could open a teleportation portal anywhere, anytime. He'd seen how convenient they were when Noah used one. "Sorry, Mr. Stark, they aren't for sale to outsiders," Mordo replied. "But if you're willing to join Camartage, we will provide one. Same for the others here." "That's a shame. I'm not planning on joining any religious order." Tony spread his hands. His life was fine as it was. He didn't want to become a monk. The Eternals, too, looked disappointed. If they'd had the rings, they wouldn't have needed the Master's help. They could have opened portals themselves and started searching for deviants across the map. The tour resumed. Led by Mordo, the group continued through Camartage, past the Master's training grounds they'd seen earlier, and through the enormous library, until Noah and Ajak emerged from the main hall's entrance, and the visit came to an end. Chapter 438, Preparing to go to the center of the Earth. The Earth's radius is roughly 6,371 kilometers, more than 6 million meters to its center. That number is staggering. The deepest ocean trench, the Mariana Trench, is only about 11,034 meters deep. The deepest borehole humans have ever drilled, the Soviet Kola superdeep borehole, reached just over 12,000 meters. Those depths are negligible compared to the distance to the planet's core. Today, Noah might become the first person to reach it. 2 days had passed since Noah last brought Tony, Banner, and the Eternal to Camartage. The purpose of that visit had been practical, to recruit the sorcerers and grant the Eternal access to teleportation. The Ancient One had not objected. She agreed readily. After the Celestials arrived, Noah and the Ancient One had discussed Earth's defenses in earnest. A direct clash between Darkstar Thresh and the Celestials was something Earth could not survive. Noah proposed a time loop as a way to buy time. After considering it, the Ancient One devised a solution: temporarily convert Earth's enormous protective net, centered on the three sanctums, into a large-scale time loop spell. It worked in theory, but it carried risks. The Ancient One would have to personally control and maintain the time loop. If she was tied to that task, she could not simultaneously deal with any dimensional demons that might invade while the regular magical protections were altered. They agreed to form a Guardian Alliance, a joint force drawn from Kamaja's sorcerers, the Eternal, and Noah's allies, to hold off potential threats long enough for the Ancient One to activate the time loop. Reinforcements could join: Asgardian forces, Tony's team, and others. Once Noah knew how long the Ancient One needed to modify the spell, there wasn't much else to debate. He left Camartage with Tony and Banner. The Eternals stayed behind, having reached a temporary cooperative arrangement. The sorcerers and the Eternal would work together to intercept the deviants heading for Alaska. Noah had already informed Ajak about those deviants and asked that they be eliminated if possible. If any reached their destination, Noah said he would deal with them personally. After Noah left, the Ancient One briefed the Camartage sorcerers on the Eternal. For many of the younger sorcerers, it was an extraordinary revelation. Most had never faced true extraterrestrial foes, and they hadn't expected their first battle to be against legendary aliens. Camartage prized peace and stillness, but enthusiasm to fight was high among some. Others preferred to remain in support roles, opening teleportation portals and handling logistics. Once she finished, the Ancient One entrusted operations to Mordo and Wong and began traveling to the Three Sanctums herself to rework the large-scale protective magic. The adjustment did not immediately disable the global safeguards. For now, Earth was still reasonably secure against dimensional incursions. In the meantime, Noah's daily business continued. Including the assignment he picked up the day he visited Camartage, he had completed 3 daily tasks. The 3 higher-value C-rank tasks together awarded 600 essence, an average of 200 essence each. All 3 had been triggered by deviants. Normally, an extraordinary threat like a deviant would be worth at least a B-rank task, around 500 essence, but since a B-rank task covering all the deviants had already been activated, the individual deviant tasks had their ranks and rewards reduced. Noah confirmed this with the system after triggering the tasks. He checked further and discovered that the system enforced a cap. Whether he accepted the B-rank task for the whole group or completed the deviants as many smaller daily tasks, the total reward for that set of deviants would be limited. In effect, the essence obtainable from that group was a fixed amount. Knowing that, Noah stopped worrying about optimizing and focused on completing what needed to be done. Today, he planned to go to the Earth's core to deal with the celestial seed Aurelion the judge had placed there. Noah had never seen a celestial seed and had no clear idea how to handle one, but he wanted to go see it. He chose the timing carefully. When the Ancient One came to the New York sanctum, he asked her again how long it would take to finish the spell conversion, and after learning the approximate schedule, he decided to act today. If he disturbed the seed before the Ancient One finished, the Celestials might sense the disturbance and rush to Earth, a complication he wanted to avoid. His actions had to align with the Ancient One's timetable. Noah did not plan to tunnel through the crust using places like the Kola Superdeep Borehole or the Mariana Trench. A few thousand kilometers of rock were trivial for him. He had other means. He would reach the center of the Earth in a different way. Noah didn't need to bore a hole straight through 6 million meters of rock to reach the Earth's core. The deeper you went, the denser and harder the material became from gravitational compression. No nation on Earth could tunnel all the way down. The Soviet Kola Superdeep project had stopped after a little over 12,000 meters because of money and technical limits. With artifacts like the World Rune or the Infinity Stones, Noah could have blasted a passage like Godzilla's atomic breath, but why scar the planet? To avoid destabilizing the globe, he chose a cleaner method. He didn't bother finding a low point like the Mariana Trench. Traveling a few dozen kilometers horizontally wouldn't make the millions of meters any easier. He'd descend from his own seaside manor. In the underground laboratory, Noah stood in his usual clothes, the textile nanobelt cinched at his waist. He hadn't worn the full Source Project armor lately, but the belt still did everything he needed. It handled his positioning and would tell him when he reached the core. Over the last 2 days, he and Lysandra had built a radar that could track him while he moved through the planet. It couldn't map the entire core, but it would keep him from getting lost. Noah nodded to Lysandra and closed his eyes. His body grew translucent, not falling through the floor, but becoming ethereal. The change was Ghost Step, his summoner skill. Ghost Step not only increased his speed, it let him ignore terrain, walls, rock, anything that would normally block movement, if he willed it. Ordinarily, the skill still treated the ground as solid, so the user wouldn't simply fall through it. But if the user intended to pass through the earth, Ghost Step could make the ground into nothing. "I'm going in, Lysandra," Noah said, looking at his faintly glowing hands. He jumped, braced himself like a diver, and plunged headfirst into the soil. He didn't collide with rock. He merged into it and sank. It was utterly dark. Magic radiated from his body, driving him forward through the black. Noah opened his eyes and saw nothing. No texture of soil, no grain. There was no light in the sealed earth. Darkness pressed in, uncomfortable and absolute. He summoned his magic, letting a blue radiance envelop him. The light painted the tunnel ahead, but he was moving so fast there was little time to study it. Propelled by raw magic, he shot deeper. A muffled splash brushed his ears. Water. He'd passed through an underground aquifer or pocket, a fleeting interruption as he sped by. He kept going. When he did stop, it was to reorient his sense of gravity and check his instruments. Noah tapped the belt. Nanomachines poured up from it and formed the helmet of the Source Project armor around his head. Ghost Step allowed anything on his body, clothing, the nanomachines, to ignore material boundaries, so the armor assembled perfectly even inside the earth. "Lysandra, where am I?" he asked. "Noah, about 200 kilometers down," she replied. "You're past the crust, in the upper mantle." The radar image she sent over showed a model of Earth's layers with a marker on his position. He adjusted his heading and plunged on. The mantle lay beneath the crust, its top anywhere from roughly 7 to 30 kilometers below the surface. It made up most of Earth's volume and the majority of its mass. Beneath the mantle waited the legendary core. Noah's descent continued, magic pushing him toward the planet's center. Chapter 440, Crossing the Sea of Magma, Arriving, Continue. Noah checked his position and pushed downward again. The surge of magic drove him faster and faster. Under the effect of Ghost Step, the magic he released didn't interact with the surrounding soil. Otherwise, his power would have incinerated a tunnel through the earth as he accelerated. At his current speed, the core was not far away. He had considered another option earlier, using the space stone to teleport straight into the core and skip the travel time. But tests had shown that became impossible the closer he got. The magnetic field near the core grew chaotic, and a strange energy interfered with his space power. Noah suspected the Celestial's influence. A defense mechanism triggered by approaching the Celestial Group embryo seed was blocking teleportation, so he chose the slower, more reliable route, dive from the surface. Massive magic continued to flow from him, forming a wake like a rocket's exhaust behind him. The resolve rune inside him had already activated, giving him a steady stream of power. With enough force, he could have circled the planet in no time. On the Project Helmet's face shield, the geological model in the upper right corner flickered. He had breached the lower mantle and entered the core. Noah, zzz, a little further, zzz, and the signal won't reach. The rest, zzz, is up to you. Lyssandra's voice crackled through with static as their link reached its limit. Ordinarily, radio waves couldn't reach this depth, but Project World Communications had extended their range only so far. This was the cutoff. Okay, wait for my good news, Noah replied, then lost contact with the surface. With the map frozen at his last known position and telemetry gone, he had to be precise. A wrong angle now could send him out on the opposite side of the planet. He relied on his last displayed coordinates and the direction of gravity to keep heading down. The darkness around him deepened, but Ghost Step remained active. In the reality world, the summoner skill worked a little differently than in the game. It had no fixed duration. As long as Noah had the stamina, the phase state could be maintained indefinitely. With the resolve rune supplying what was essentially limitless endurance, he didn't worry about the skill cutting out mid-flight and leaving him trapped in the crust. After a time, the scene shifted. The endless black gave way to a vast ocean of molten rock. Heat waves rolled toward him. Have I arrived? Noah halted, feeling the searing air. He shaped his magic into a shield. Though Ghost Step freed him from terrain effects, the heat was still real. The outer core's temperature sat around 4,000 degrees Celsius, climbing towards 6,000 in the inner core. Noah studied the magma. This was the outer core, liquid iron and nickel in a churning sea. He hadn't reached the seed yet. The Celestial's embryo would be at the center, in the inner core. He pushed forward, slicing through the magma with protected momentum. He also widened his senses with magic, boosting perception. Once he reached the inner core, he would have to find the Celestial Group embryo seed by its aura. The outer core's thickness was massive, almost as thick as the mantle, so he traveled a while longer through the red ocean before it faded to pitch black. He had entered the inner core. He stopped. A powerful presence washed through the solid center, an overwhelming aura of energy. It was unmistakable. The Celestial Group embryo. Good, the search was unnecessary. Following the aura would lead him straight to the target. About time, Noah muttered. The mission to neutralize the Celestial seed had been sitting on his panel for too long. Now it was time to finish it.